Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen. Can we calm down so we can get this wonderful panel going? I'd be very grateful. It's very noisy here anyway. So I want to thank you for coming. My name is Stephen Erlanger. I'm the diplomatic correspondent in Europe for the New York Times and an old friend of this Paris Peace Forum. And we have a really good panel to talk about, I think, one of the crucial issues of the moment, and that is the war in Europe, the energy crisis, the sustainability crisis, and the question of domestic politics, which is an impact of all these tensions. And it's a very difficult job, I think, for analysts, let alone governments, to try to find their way through dealing with these problems, which can contradict one another. So I think you all know what's in front of you, but let me just say it's a great pleasure to have Laurence Boone with me, who is the Secretary of State for Europe of the French Republic. So c'était un grand plaisir, merci. And then to have Anniken Huitfeldt, who is the Foreign Minister of Norway. And then Jackson Kimani on my far left, who's the CEO of the Climate Action Platform for Africa. And then very lucky also on my far right to have Gordon Grlic-Radman, who is the Foreign Minister of Croatia. So I think we'll begin, since we're in the capital of the great French Republic, with Madame Boone. And one of the things I just want to have us all think about, perhaps, is how you manage the impact on political structures of these tensions. I mean, France had the Gilets jaunes, which sort of set the model, in a way, was the great warning for everyone about how certain kinds of climate policies could have political impact. And then we've just survived here a general strike yesterday. I managed to get around with difficulty. Now, general strikes are a kind of French play. It's very, very common. I remember once walking to Orly Airport when there was a truckers' strike. But the issues are real. The issues are about inflation. The issues are about how to heat people's homes, how to pay for gasoline for cars. So, Madame Boone, I mean, how does one square this circle, or how does one begin to try to square the circle?
So we have to distinguish two things. One is the consequences of Russia's war of aggression to Ukraine, and the other one is climate change. On the first front, I think the most important thing is to keep in mind that we European, and when I say European in the large sense, have to remain united. And what we are getting through with elevated energy prices is a price we pay for this war, but it's the weaponization by Russia of essential commodities like energy and food. So that's the first thing. And the fact that we have remained united all along, not only when I said Europe, I obviously include Norway and all the countries on the continent, is super important, I think, because it shows how important values and respect of territorial integrity and the rule of law and democracy is important. Now, how do we get through these very high prices now? It's a two-level political approach. One is the European solidarity again, and at the EU we've been discussing since June mechanism to lower energy prices, both gas and electricity, and we've made huge progress. And at the national level, like many other European countries, we have what we call a price shield, where we limit the increase in gas and electricity prices. Looking forward, I think this has two implications we can discuss together later on. The first one is, what is this world where you can weaponize basic commodities, and how should we think about geopolitics and trade and investment? And the second one is, how are we going to accompany firms and people through the energy transition? But if I answer now, you will find that I'm too long, so I'll stop here.
No, I mean, I just want to follow up a little bit, because the Germans have just been criticized for what Scholz called the double kaboom, which is this 200 billion euro subsidy to help companies and people through the winter. France has done something similar. I don't think it's the same size, but and the first question, I guess, is this a debt we just throw down the road? And secondly, are you getting criticism from poorer countries who can't afford that kind of protection?
So this is obviously an excellent question. I think there are two things. The first one is, we have a situation which is the mirror image of what happened during COVID. During the COVID crisis, the economies that were the most affected were services-driven economies. And today, the economies the most affected are manufacturing-driven economy. So they pay a higher price. This is true. Which is why you find some differences in this price shield for firms and people. Now there is, and you will forgive me for using this word again, but there is something called European solidarity, where we're looking at mechanism to actually help those countries which haven't got the fiscal capacity to protect their companies and their people as well as some other countries.
I believe in solidarity, at least as an aspiration. So now I'm going to turn to Anniken from Norway, which is a country, I think, of about 5 million people,
Yeah.
but enormously wealthy from fossil fuels. But Norway does this very intriguing thing, which is it runs its own country on hydropower, not on fossil fuels. It sells fossil fuels and saves the money for either a rainy or a dry day. I'm not sure which. But you're now under pressure, I think, in the name of European solidarity, to produce more, to give more. How do you cope with that?
Just let me state in the beginning that on one hand, Russia is waging a war of aggression against Ukraine, but also an energy war against the rest of Europe. And we see that very clearly in several ways, also in Norway. On the other hand, we must step up our efforts to tackle the climate change. So Russia is trying to divide us, and then we should stay united. When it comes to the Norwegian gas production, Russia used to supply Europe with 40% of Europe's gas. It's now down to 10 to 15%. And for Norway, we have postponed maintenance, and we are now producing on maximum capacity. So we used to be the second largest, now we are the largest, providing Europe with 40%.
Oh, wow.
Before it was between 25 and 30%. So, I mean, we simply cannot produce more. Well, we also have a huge responsibility to protect critical infrastructure on the Norwegian continental shelf. And we have increased presence from defense forces, but also from the police. And we are also very grateful for the support of allies and partners in this effort.
But I mean, are you charging world price for what you're selling, or are you giving your European colleagues a bit of a discount?
You know, we are not operating these fields from the state. These are private companies, and we cooperate together with them. And for 20 years ago, these companies used to negotiate long-term contracts, but because of they think they could benefit more from fixed price and the prices in the stock market. So instead of long-term contracts in the past, European countries went over to short-term contracts, and we will really much encourage long-term contracts because we don't have any interest of this huge.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what Gazprom did too, by the way.
Yeah.
No, so it's, I mean, but what people worry about, I don't mean to kind of push you on this, but we'll get through this winter. The stocks are quite full. It's very expensive. I get terrified whenever I hear from Engie, which is my energy company. I'm waiting for the big round bill at the end. But people worry about next winter because stocks will be low. And so are you hoping to actually construct new ways of producing more, or are you really at a limit now?
We are at the limit, but what we can provide is more technology and cooperation, and also investments in renewable funds, because that would be very important.
I mean, is there a way to send more of your hydropower elsewhere, or is that the kind of infrastructure that's too hard to do?
No, we also do that, because we have a common European market.
Do it with Sweden and Denmark and so on, right?
Yeah, we are a part of the common European energy market. So the energy prices also are in a very high level in Norway because of that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Jackson.
So the spot market will also influence on the electricity, even in hydropower.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
of course.
Right. No, Jackson. When you look at this debate in Europe, and you look at this basically regional war. Now, there's a lot at stake in this war, but it's not Africa's war, it's not India's war, it's not China's war, really. Do you think the war is reducing the chances that the global south is going to get answers on climate change? Is it making the situation worse, or is there some brighter side to it, do you think?
Well, I think, number one, the war reinforces what a lot of global south has always thought, that they're primarily on their own, for the most part. But in a roundabout way, the war has enabled a number of things to happen. Because of the war, obviously the price of fossil fuels has gone up, which has then made renewable technologies more competitive. That's number one. But the war has also spooked a lot of countries to essentially have an additional incentive for their own economic and energy security and start focusing on the renewable energy futures that they need to be thinking about, that perhaps they may not have been thinking of at that time. And for Africa and the rest of the global south, without the sort of the burden of an old economy or the legacy of energy and agricultural assets that you probably have to win yourself off of in the global north, there's a very compelling argument to be made in terms of leapfrogging, similar to what happens with telecommunications, in going into the green economies of the future. In essence, leveraging the fact that we've lagged behind in our development to our advantage, and allowing that we can immediately adopt some of the green technologies, some of the new ideas that are coming in as the energy of the future.
I mean, is there a strong temptation among oil-producing companies just to cash in?
Oh, no, absolutely. And as the Climate Action Platform for Africa, CAP-A, our conversation with decision makers is not to forego a resource that today has a demand. Yes, there's a lot of new discoveries in terms of natural gas reserves, all manner of different fossil fuels. We essentially encourage them to adopt, and the Honorable Minister for Norway is here, adopt the Norway model. in a way, where there is, if you think of drug addicts and drug dealers, as a drug dealer in some commodity that is in demand, you can cash in from the addicts, perhaps in the global north, but you don't need to be addicted yourself. So allow that this can benefit you, and that benefit, then you can plow it back towards the right investment so that you don't find yourself stranded with some assets 10, 15, 20 years from now that then you'll be struggling to get yourself out of.
He's not really calling you crack dealers, but that was
By
the
no
implication.
stretch of imagination, yes.
No, but I just want to press you on one more thing. As you know, Africa's a big place, 54 countries. I think we shouldn't generalize, but as people look to all the concentration on this war in Europe, do people feel, you said we feel on our own, left alone on our own, but is there anger also?
Well, I think there is more reality check than anger, where the fact that maybe there was an expectation of some sorts, given some of what ails Africa and the continent, and as you said, it's a big continent, 54 different countries, and the attention that has drawn from the rest of the world compared to perhaps what has happened to Russia, then you start realizing perhaps we don't rise to that level of priority. But then the converse to that is what are you doing also with what you have, And in the context of climate change, there's increasingly a shift that is starting to happen where African countries, given what has transpired since Copenhagen in 2009, where $100 billion was committed by the global north in terms of adaptation, and we're 13, 12, 14 years down the road, nothing has essentially been drawn down. So they're starting to wake up the reality of we can also be focused on what we could do ourselves from a climate action standpoint. We have some assets that we can leverage to enable us to reach where we need to be. And this is not philanthropy. This is starting to talk the language of business. Yeah. But then we need to get the attention of the capital owners in the global north to find value in deploying their capital in Africa with a return that is going to be superior to where else they're placing their capital today.
Well, one thing that could help is everybody seems terrified of China. So, you can always say, well, if you don't provide the money, the Chinese will, right? I bet that'll work sometimes.
That is part of the approach, yes.
Gordon, you've been very patient. Thank you. Croatia has been an early supporter of Ukraine. Croatia made early visits to Kiev before many other European leaders came. And you've opened a big LNG terminal. So as we talk a little bit more about what you're doing within the EU to create this energy union. And if you want to talk about that too, that would be great. But no, please.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. And, it's on. Thank you. Yes, indeed, we were the strongest supporter of Ukraine independence, territorial integrity, and it was also manifested 2 weeks ago when Croatia organized the first parliamentarian Crimea platform, and we pulled together 55 presidents of national parliaments and 5 of international, like the Council of Europe, OSCE, NATO, and so on. More than 1,000 people just sent a very strong message that democratic countries are on the right side of history on the democracy. Of course, first of all, what is the conclusion? How we can further on to help, to assist Ukraine. and not to be involved, it's a very sensitive issue, to be involved in aggression, in war in Ukraine. Croatia really helped financially with material, military, and all was necessary for Ukraine, although we are a small country. But having in mind that the same situation we are passed through 30 years ago, and Croatia was also victim of aggression. That means that we have really a special sense and understanding for Ukraine. LNG terminal.
Just remind people of what happened 30 years ago, because I'm not sure everyone knows.
Yes, Croatia was a part of former Yugoslavia. It was unfortunately artificially created state, a composition of 6 republics and 2 autonomous provinces. But every republic has a right, according to the constitution, to proclaim sovereignty, independency. But because of the majority of the people and the nation led at that time by Milosevic, and with the idea of Great Serbia, he wanted to prevent any kind of the liberalization. And Croatia was a battlefield of this aggression. But however, thanks to the national community, thanks to our leadership and our homeland war, our brave soldiers, we defeated ourselves, and Croatia was, together with Slovenia, internationally recognized on 15th January 1992.
Right. Okay, good.
Yes, and
That sort of does it.
30 years later, Croatia and Slovenia are members of the European Union, members of NATO, and of all prestige and valuable international organizations. What remains, what is ahead of us, to be member of a Schengen zone, and very soon, till the end of the year, and as of 1st January 2023, we will introduce euro.
But talk a bit about the European energy effort
Of course,
and what you're doing.
Croatia supported and it's get along with the European Energy Union, which is crucial, and one of 5 pillars is energy supply and diversification of sources. Croatian concrete contribution is LNG terminal on island Krk. It is European project, but however, it is also regional power project because Croatia is responsible to its neighborhood, not only European Union, but Western Balkans as well. We would like to have a stable institution, functional and based rule-based rule order in the Western Balkans. LNG terminal, had it not been this crisis in Ukraine, we would have been really satisfied with the capacity of LNG terminal, namely 2 BCM. It's right now, and because of this crisis, our government decided in August to double its capacity up to 6.1,
Right.
but it needs time. In terms of 3 years,
Right.
we will be
Thank you.
capable just to make sure, to ensure their energy independency of
Right.
Croatia and, of course, of the region, however.
Voila. Thank you very much. So, Laurence, I mean, you're an economist. Is this energy union going to work? I mean, how does it work? I mean, is it just like when Borrell talks of the language of power? The language of power isn't power, it's just language.
I agree. You could have said there's no love, there's only proofs of love, right? It's no, I think there are several elements which Gordon has reminded us, and both Jackson and Anniken were mentioning. First one is what this war, what this crisis is doing is to accelerate our policies for energy transition. That's the first thing. And Annika was reminding how quickly we have reduced our dependency to Russian gas pipeline gas. But also Rondon was reminding us that he has built up an LNG terminal. What we are seeing is a fast-forward transformation of the European energy market. The number of LNG terminals has nearly doubled, if not more. So number one, accelerate energy transition, reduce fossil fuel dependency, become what both Jackson and Anniken were saying, not less and less dependent, and we are starting this. Just in France, we voted a law to accelerate all the renewable energy. Number two, and I think you're right, is that wishful thinking, because the landscape's changing. We have an incomplete energy single market because of not enough interconnections. So there has been a plan in 2018 for enhancing interconnection, but now the energy landscape has changed. So we will be working on a new plan to enhance this interconnection. I think we still shouldn't downplay them too much, because at the moment, we do have enough interconnection to display solidarity throughout the Union. We export gas to Germany. They export electricity to us. Number three, I think, is reducing consumption. And as we were reducing export, we have been and we will continue to reduce consumption. I think that's very important. We need to change our standards of living when it comes to energy. And number four, this is something I wanted to reply to Jackson, the 100 billion that Western countries have committed to help the South. We need to do more. We need first to fulfill the pledge, which is not the case, and then we need to do more, because as you were saying, the return on investment will be higher. But as you can see, this is all about being more responsible and display more solidarity. And if you just allow me 30 seconds, I would like to thank here, among 10 other countries, Norway and Croatia, to help us with the refugees that have landed in France with the boat Ocean Viking. A big, big thank you, and I would like you to actually applaud all those countries who are helping us. Thank you.
Efficiency matters.
Yes.
I mean, and increasing efficiency matters. Even Ukraine, before the war, sharply reduced its dependency on Russian gas by just double glazing windows. So, I mean, it really can help. So I wanted to ask you, since you brought up the other key part of this panel, which is the green transition, what is going on with the French nuclear industry?
I think there are a couple of things, at least.
I don't want to be injuste.
No, but I mean, isolation, energy efficiency is something which is very, very important. In the 70s and 80s, thanks both to energy efficiency, as you say, glass windows isolation, reducing the speed when using your car, we saved a lot of energy, and at the same time, we developed this nuclear industry. And the truth is there was a decoupling of energy consumption, fossil fuel energy consumption, and GDP growth. So the first point I'd like to make is this is possible, and we can do it again. Now, these are big investments, and these are big innovation investment. And I think it's fair to say that for a while, perhaps we have not enough invested in there. There was a lot of popular protest and anxiety about nuclear security. Now, you know, what is the most trusted French agency?
It's not the police.
It's the Nuclear Security Agency. And that shows that, you know, we have the power to actually make people trust nuclear electricity. So what the French president and our energy minister have launched is a huge program to accelerate the maintenance of the existing nuclear plants and to renew what we call the nuclear park. And I think many other countries in the EU are also changing the way that they are looking at nuclear. Never waste a good crisis.
No, but I mean, you raise a very good point, because in some ways, the anxiety because of Fukushima, which caused Angela Merkel to do her Energiewende one afternoon, in some ways, you've just said it, people started to spend less on maintenance and more on green energy efforts. And every choice has a price. And I don't question the choice. People try to make the best choices. But sometimes, like diesel cars, it turns out to be the wrong choice. So listen, we have about 15 minutes left. And I really want you and the audience to ask questions. You can ask questions of any of us. I think someone will have a microphone, right? So if you could raise your hand, if you have a question, please introduce yourself and try to ask a question and not make a speech and address it to someone. So is there anyone who would like to ask a question? And if not, that's okay too. No. Okay. Good. Okay. Voila. Thank you.
Can you hear from this? Okay. Thank you for the very interesting talk, and thank you to all the panelists.
Talk loudly.
Can you hear now?
Better.
Wonderful. My question is, within the EU, how do you balance the different interests from different countries in terms of how they see the pathways for energy diversification? You mentioned that France is looking at updating the existing nuclear parks. Is this something that's aligned across different EU memberships? Is there different pathways that other countries are taking?
You really have to hold it right to your mouth and speak really, really loudly.
I think it's easier for
I mean,
those
why
down
don't
there
you
to
come up
listen to
here?
because they have earphones. We don't.
Apparently you
have
can't hear from this.
Yeah,
Just
I
up
mean,
there.
Okay. Thank you. Just
but also
wondering-
use the mic.
Okay.
Yeah,
How about now?
better.
Okay, thank you. My question was, how are different countries within the EU looking at their pathways for energy diversification and the energy transition? France is mentioning looking into upgrading or updating the nuclear parks. Is this the case across EU countries? What do you do to connect and coordinate?
Who would like to try to answer that?
I can if you want.
Yeah? Okay.
So thank you. I think that that's a really good question because we have different energy mix across EU countries, but we have all voted something called Fit for 55, which is a commitment to reduce carbon emission by 55% by 2030 and then reduce them to zero by 2050. But because we have different energy mix, it's like the global Paris Agreement. We have our own way, if each of us, to achieve that. For example, if Croatia wants to use windmills and no nuclear, which is not the case, but you can correct, they could. The important thing is we achieve our emission reduction and we have sufficient interconnection that we can ensure our respective security. One additional thing, and I think Jackson mentioned that, technology is evolving super fast. And what's expensive today might not be expensive in 5 years. So every 5 years or every 6 years, we will review what we are doing to adjust our strategy to make it the most cost efficient that we can. And the last thing is we have voted this Just Transition Fund, which will allow us to help firms to change their technology and help people, for example, who were working in a coal plant, to actually upskill and reskill and move on somewhere else. Thank you.
I think that's really critical because, frankly, that's why the people of Calais vote for the far right and not the Communist Party, because people failed to do that in the past. Anniken, go ahead.
I think the discussion on nuclear power plants here in France and also in Germany demonstrates very clearly that we need a real alternative before we shut down existing energy sources. I mean, Norway is an oil and gas producing country. We know that fossil fuel will not be the future. I mean, we are selling much more electric cars in Norway now than cars that use fossil fuels. So we know that. But we are now using all the engineers, all the know-how to promote and encourage the green transition. Therefore, for instance, the biggest oil-producing company in Norway, Statoil, changed their name to Equinor to invest in offshore wind, for instance, outside the American coast. And we are also using a lot of the money that we gain from energy production in order to invest in also Africa, in very many funds, also in Europe. So I also think that we, as an oil and gas producing nation, we know that gas is a transition energy source, and we also are using the knowledge and also the surplus from this industry to invest in renewables.
Yes. And also, Norway was clever enough to save most of the money it made selling oil and gas for this future transition. So I have a question here and then a question there. So I mean, let's take both questions at the same time, please.
Thank you very much, Steve. Great panel. Question a bit. I want to focus on some of the acute differences that have emerged between the global north and the south, particularly in the case of COP27. And in particular, there are two issues that seem to be really problematic. The first one is this emphasis on no fossil fuel investment in the developing world, while at the same by many Western countries, in the aftermath of Glasgow. Now, of course, the northern countries are doubling down on fossil fuels, which doesn't go over very well in the global south. And the related issue now is, in terms of mobilizing this $100 billion that's been promised since 2009, there's also now requests for financing for loss and damage. Are those things going to be in tension with one another in an era of constrained budgets?
Thank you very much. My name is Arne Lietz, former member of the European Parliament, now working at Brunswick Group in Berlin, Germany. My question goes to energy transition, looking at hydrogen. For example, as I'm coming from Germany, we're really much trying to build alliances throughout the world. And is this conferences on northern, southern issues? The question is, when, for example, Namibia, which is now doing a big stake on building up capacity on hydrogen, when we do this partnerships, are that real partnerships? How much do you think we have to integrate into this partnership? This development of hydrogen is going to be also productively for this country, for the countries who are producing them, that they build up science, technology, and also a part of the supply chain.
Great.
That we don't get into the same mistake as we have done before. Thank
Alles
you.
klar.
Yeah, so quickly, I think you're touching on a very sort of...
Sensitive.
Yeah, Steve said sensitive. I was going to use a different word. What you see, the messaging over the last several years has always been, for the global south, you need to adapt to the changes that have happened, and to the extent possible, perhaps keep your emissions low as they have been. In other words, do not develop as much, remain as poor so that your emissions remain relevant, essentially. That has been the implicit message, in a way. And in all honesty, if the global south was to develop to middle income status with the same emissions profile as the current middle income countries, then we can forget about keeping, peak warming below 2 degrees. 1.5 would just not even be achievable. So those are the dynamics that are present today. And adaptation, loss and damage will help with some of what has already happened, but by no means is it going to solve what is required. And if you think about some of the messaging that is coming in from the global north to the global south, if you are to keep your emissions profile low, then that requires some massive levels of investments. So that if your growth pathway is going to be a low emissions pathway, it's not going to just happen without the level of investment that is needed to enable that to be the case. And part of what we are doing as the Climate Action Platform for Africa is identifying viable opportunities, economic opportunities, where we move away from just having a hat in hand. Allow that you come in with the incentive of making a return on an investment that is merited at a global scale. So it's not just something that is good to have and to help the global south. It's something that is superior results, superior returns compared to the rest of the world.
Is hydrogen one of those things?
So, yes. So green hydrogen, green ammonia, those are some of the future green industrial clusters that Africa is well positioned. Yes. Number one, because there is vast amounts of renewable energy, untapped renewable energy available within the continent. Secondly, vast amounts of land endowments that are unutilized right now that you can lay back-to-back solar panels over hundreds and thousands of kilometers squared. And then thirdly, this very youthful and energetic workforce that you're unlikely to find anywhere else in the world. So there are things that Africa, the global south, provides for the rest of the world that make it a viable destination for a lot of what is required to solve this crisis.
And I tell you, Germany will drink as much green ammonia as you can produce. Are there other questions? Yes, okay. Sorry. Patience.
Okay, I come closer. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, Dmytro Naumenko, Ukrainian Center for European Policy, Ukraine. I guess a question regarding the energy security or its rethinking in Europe now and the place of Ukraine currently, because there are basically two lines that should be thought about. So one is emergency support of our electricity system, which are currently under missiles attack and needs to be supported. And the second question, whether strategically European Union, how it now wants to cooperate with Ukraine in future for green technologies, for synchronized efforts, for example, storing European gas in our underground storages, so etc., etc. So probably you have a comprehensive vision.
Thank you. Spasibo vám. So I'm going to let one of the foreign ministers or one of the ministers try to answer that question. Laurence?
Okay. Thanks for the question, which is obviously highlight very well the emergency situation of Ukraine on top of the humanitarian and military situation. It is true, and we hear from Ukraine, and some parliamentaries were in France earlier this week about the dire state of the energy situation there. I think the EU, the G7, and what we call G7 Plus, so Norway is part of it, I think is very much focused on this, providing generators, providing all the temporary tools that are needed to offset the effect of these electricity shortages. Perhaps I can highlight here that on the 13th of December, there will be a global conference in Paris co-hosted by the French president and Prime Minister and President Zelensky, precisely to focus on the short-term resilience needs, so generators, ambulances, anything. And it will not be talks, it will be financial commitment and material equipment. The message I want to send here is this is super important, and we will continue now and in the future to help.
Yeah, my Prime Minister and President Zelensky, they have a very close relationship. We will not be able to send Norwegian gas to Ukraine because we don't have pipelines to Ukraine. But you might be aware of that we have contributed substantially, so Ukraine can buy gas on the spot market in Europe. And we will also contribute to the recovery of Ukraine. And the energy system will certainly be a very important part of this, where we are ready to contribute.
We're basically out of time, but if you'll permit me, just with a personal thought, this is Armistice Day, right? This is the day the slaughter of World War I ended. we have another war in Europe. It's a brutal war. I covered the Chechen war. I've watched Russia fight. And I'm glad you asked your question. Part of what we're all talking about, in a way, is the solidarity we have not just inside Europe, but with a candidate member who is under deep, deep threat today. So I just wanted to thank you and to thank our panel and thank you in the audience and wish you all bonne journée. Thank you.